Ok, bienvenidos a una nueva sesión en nuestro ciclo de entrenamientos del curso de astronomía. Saludamos a todo nuestro público, a nuestros suscriptores, y hoy les traigo una pequeña anécdota, una inducción a la astrofotografía. Nuestra historia comienza en el año 1827 con el señor John Walker, quien estaba trabajando con antimonio, un sulfuro de antimonio y clorato de potasio. Él estaba preparando su mezcla con una pajilla, estaba revolviendo, la pajilla se secó y él naturalmente, al querer limpiarla, se solidificó y trató de rasparla con una hoja de papel lija. Inmediatamente la mezcla se enciende en fuego, y aquí nace el concepto de la cerilla o el fósforo que conocemos hoy. 1839, un químico bastante dedicado está trabajando con una mezcla de el látex o caucho natural y sulfuro. En ese momento el látex se utilizaba casi que de manera decorativa o deportiva en el caso de los mayas. Un día de esto nos sentamos a hablar de esa civilización, pero accidentalmente el químico del que le estoy hablando deja caer parte de la preparación con la que estaba trabajando en una estufa caliente. Eso solidifica el caucho, y ahí comienza lo que se conoce como el proceso de vulcanización. Entonces, desde ese momento, la tecnología que se utiliza para el látex ahora se vuelve comercial. Para que lo tengan presente, el nombre del químico era Charles Goodyear, que se los muestro aquí en pantalla. Lastimosamente, el señor Charles no alcanzó a disfrutar de las mieles de su invención, lo cual se vino a dar, si mal no recuerdo, unos 60 años después de su muerte. Y creo que hemos visto cómo en el top 5 de las mayores productoras de llantas hay una que se llama Goodyear. En 1896, el señor Henry Beckler está trabajando con cristales enriquecidos de uranio, o cristales de uranio enriquecidos. Él los coloca sobre una placa de vidrio, y la teoría que tiene, la idea es que el sol, los rayos del sol van a crear una imagen de los cristales en el vidrio. En vista de que estaba nublado, el señor Henry guarda la muestra, y cuando regresa a los pocos días se encuentra con que los cristales habían formado una especie de silueta. El señor Charles había descubierto la radiación o los rayos X que estaban en su furor en su momento, pero no fue él, sino muchos años después el señor Pierre y Mary Curie los que popularizaron y dieron a conocer el trabajo del amigo Henry. En 1928, el señor Alexander Fleming está en su laboratorio trabajando con una muestra de estafilococo. Señor Alexander se va de vacaciones en agosto, y cuando regresa en septiembre se encuentra con que la bacteria había sido consumida en su totalidad por un hongo. El 3 de septiembre de 1928 nace la penicilina. En 1945, el señor Percy Spencer, en pantalla, está trabajando en un nuevo sistema de radar que consiste en un tubo al vacío, casi como el que se utiliza para los rayos catódicos de esos televisores viejos, con un imán, un electroimán por dentro, llamado magnetrón. El experimento no funcionó, pero Algo de lo que se percata el señor Perry es que en el bolsillo tenía una barra de chocolate que se había derretido. Sospechando que había sido el magnetrón, la siguiente prueba que hace es con palomitas de maíz, y hay una leyenda urbana que habla de haber hecho explotar un huevo con este nuevo invento. Les llamo invento, pero en realidad todos fueron descubrimientos accidentales. Eso es lo que tienen en común todas estas historias que les estoy compartiendo en este momento. Sin embargo, para hablar de fotografía hay que devolvernos en el tiempo y ver cómo ha sido todo el desarrollo intencional. Desarrollo intencional, no fue accidental. Para continuar con nuestra historia, debo mostrarles que el inicio de la fotografía no comienza con la cámara, sino con referencias hacia el año 1074 antes de Cristo, en China, donde ya había referencias a este dispositivo, que no era más que una habitación completamente a oscuras, en las que se perforaba un agujero muy pequeño en una de las paredes, y casi que de manera mágica en el extremo opuesto se podía ver una imagen a color invertida proyectado en la pared. Entonces, quiero compartirles unos videos que nos van a llevar un poquito de a pequeños pasos, desde lo más simple del proceso de la construcción de las cámaras hasta lo que tenemos hoy día.
Technology! This episode, all cameras!
Once again, we're not having you react to a video today.
Snap.
You're reacting to this.
Is this a GoPro? Oh, the camera. It's a camera. I already know it.
An old school camera.
An old camera, I think.
Pretty ugly.
Big. But, like, not camera's big. Oh, I know what this is. This is a camera. I have this at my house. It's so good. Question time!
So you know what it is.
An old camera, yes.
I've never seen a camera like this in real life.
Go ahead and take a picture with it.
Say cheese.
Wait, no, it didn't click. It doesn't work.
How do I see what I'm...
Wait a minute, isn't this thing even on? Does this thing have any batteries?
This is like a scavenger hunt.
Open. No, close. Shouldn't this twist? There it is. Okay.
I did something. How do I turn it? Ah!
Looks like this thing.
All-time selfie! I got a selfie.
I'm a pro, right? Wait, what? Did I do it right?
So you actually haven't taken a picture yet.
Oh. I just wasted my selfie time.
There is something else that you need to do.
Is it like a whole nother piece?
Smash it into pieces and buy a new one? I don't know, actually. I've never used a camera like this. A battery, a plug, a tape, a little card thing. There's no
photo fluid in this thing.
I was going to say, is there any film in here? But then I thought, of course you'd put film in here. That's why when I opened this, I said, no, I didn't want to ruin the film. So I didn't look inside to see there was no film.
You actually need something called film.
Oh, yeah.
Film. Do you guys have film? Oh, like what they use in the movies?
What is film?
I have no idea. It's how you take pictures. It's like one of those camera chips that you put in that give you storage.
This magical roll of almost this brownish color with little boxes on the top.
So we're gonna give you some film.
A real film. I've always wanted to see film. Looks like a battery. Now we have to find out what I'm supposed to do with this.
Okay, so how do you load that into the camera?
Here, let's try and find an opening. Why did things have to be so hard back then?
Do I open? No, that's a battery.
If this works, I think I'm a genius. If it doesn't work, I think I'm an idiot.
So it's actually on the other side.
I'm an
Flip it over.
idiot. Aha! Really don't want to break it. There.
No.
Leave it out.
No.
Gosh, dang it. Can somebody help me?
Yes.
I've done this before. I know I have. I can do this. Got it, yes.
Oh, I got it! I think.
Do I need to like roll this out?
I hope there's like a YouTube tutorial video for this or something. That'd be great.
Not too much, just the tip where it's thinner. It'll automatically roll it out for me.
What am I doing? What am I doing?
Here we go, people.
Who knew taking a picture could be such hard work?
All right, now you can take a picture.
Awesome. It's blinding.
Okay, so where's the picture?
How do I see the picture though?
How do I look at my picture?
You can't.
Then what's the whole point of taking it?
So what's the point?
Kind of useless then.
Why do you have a camera then?
How do you people get pictures off of this thing?
So it used to be that you'd take pictures on your camera and then you'd have no idea how they turned out until you brought it to a store.
Oh, come on. You're not making me walk to a store now, are you?
Then you'd have to wait at least an hour for them to develop the film.
What would you do while waiting?
I don't know how I would have survived.
Then you would finally be given your pictures physically, not on a computer, on a phone, actual photographs that you could then look through.
That's not cool.
That's messed up.
So then when did real cameras come out where you didn't have to do all that?
And you had to pay for the store to do that.
That would suck.
First you pay for the camera, then you pay for the film, then you pay to get it developed, then you get your pictures.
I feel bad for those people.
Us.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Did you live with this back then? You must be really old.
And then if you wanted to take more pictures, you had to buy more film and do it all over again.
I'm happy I didn't live in that time.
This is the devil camera.
I always thought this was cool until now.
Ah.
This is so... I'm speechless.
Just how hard it is to just take a simple picture.
It used to be that people would store all their pictures in photo albums. And now everything is called albums online for photos because it's named after what they physically used to be.
But like nobody has like a physical album though.
I know.
That's kind of sad.
How many recent pictures of yourself do you have physically?
Like, that you can actually hold? None.
None.
Nothing recent.
They're all on Instagram.
I don't live old like you guys.
What we do is we kind of take them on the phone and then print it on the computer.
So finally, do you prefer the way you can take a picture now with today's technology, or do you wish you were still using cameras like that today?
Now. Probably now.
The new cameras of today.
I like how you take your pictures now.
I prefer the way that we're using now.
Taking pictures now.
I'll throw this camera away. How you can take pictures now. It's better. I say in the past, usually if you take a picture on your it'd be there forever, but it's not gonna stay there. Unless you like print every single picture you've taken out.
Technology today. You don't have to wait an hour just to see a picture.
Thank Thanks for watching another episode of Kids React.
Let us know what technology we should react to next.
Make sure you subscribe. We have new episodes every single week.
Say bye.
Ok, eso para ponerlos en contexto. Ahora les voy a compartir solo un fragmento para no hacer tan largo el video de uno de mis canales favoritos y vamos a ir como que profundizando un poquito más en lo que es con nuestro conocimiento sobre las cámaras.
When I first loaded Portra 400 35mm film into an SLR camera for the first time, I aimed the camera and I took the photo, I felt something. There's something different about film. It feels different. It's not just the shutter click. SLR, you can just take as many photos as you want and you don't really think about it. But when you take a film photo, I don't know how to explain it. You got to do it for yourself. You stop, you know you have 36 rounds and you just take the shot, pull the trigger, and you get the perfect shot. And you're rewarded when you see your photos because you know you were in the moment more because you cared more about the photo. In today's throwaway digital photography world, this is a breath of fresh air. That's the feeling of taking a film, the number making a comeback, and it is. If that 35mm film is coming back in a big way. Today we're going to explore all this. We're going to learn about the chemistry, the science behind how this works, and the people that are working to preserve this art. So not only is the feel of taking photos different with film, the feel of the photos themselves are different. Look at these photos that I took. I don't know how to describe it, but there's something about the feeling of these photos that's deeper and more meaningful to me. Even film photos that I didn't take, they feel more authentic and real. There's a certain nostalgic feeling I get when I look at these photos. Even though these things were taken in the last 12 months, it feels like a distant memory that was collected and it's right there in front of me and I'm in the moment. The way film captures the light is a warmth. There's a beating heart to the photos, and no amount of digital manipulation or Instagram filters can recreate that feeling that film just gives you straight out of the camera. So I guess what I'm saying is film feels like magic. But not only does it have that emotional magic to it, there's a mechanical, scientific magic to it as well. You're taking photons from a scene in front of you, you're capturing them in a clever arrangement of chemicals on a physical object, you're hiding it in a dark box, and you're holding it there until you can do some more chemical magic to make that photo be revealed at a later time. It is an amazing process, and today what I'd like to do is look at how film development works. If you take a single strip of 35mm black and white film and you look at it edgewise like this, you'll see that it's made up of several different layers. This part down here is the actual film made from cellulose triacetate. This layer here is the magic layer. This is called the emulsion. It's a mixture of gelatin and light-sensitive silver halide crystals, literally little granular rock crystals mixed together in suspension in that gelatin. There's an anti-static layer on the back and an anti-scratch layer on the front and an anti-halation layer behind the emulsion. Basically, this layer absorbs all the light once it passes through the emulsion and makes it so it doesn't bounce back up. When the silver halide crystals are exposed to light, they undergo a change and a latent image is formed on the crystals. If you think about what's going on, when you take a picture, you are exposing silver halide crystals to light. When you release the shutter, you have a latent image on the film and it advances over here into the box and it hides it in the dark so that you have this latent image next to all these unexposed silver halide crystals. So the trick is, how do I take that latent image and turn it into a permanent image? I want to lock it in. To do this, we have to go through what's called the development process. This is how that process works. Let's take a picture of this flower. By exposing our film to light, that latent image is formed on the flower within the silver halide crystals. The first thing we need to do is to turn this latent image into a permanent image. We do this with a chemical called developer. When the film comes in contact with a developer, the silver halide that's been exposed to light turns into actual silver metal, which is opaque. So now we have actual metallic silver crystals, and we have the unexposed silver halide crystals that was on the film to begin with. After rinsing the film in a stop bath, the film is put into another chemical known as the fixture, which washes away any remaining silver halide from the film that hasn't been exposed yet. You're then left with a negative of the image you took in the silver metal suspended in gelatin. A negative means that the white colors are black and the black colors are white. The light is inverted. So this is an actual black and white photo that I took. This is the positive image, but if I were to flip the photo negative, you can see that it actually corresponds with the photo film negative. To me, it sounded a little crazy that a film negative could have little particles of silver in it, but check this out. Let's put this thing under the microscope here, and if you remember the large photo, let's zoom in on my son in the back of that trailer there, and let's look at his face. Okay, check that out. I picked this photo because their faces are so small in the back of that trailer there, but if we move up in magnification and we readjust here, you can see that the image is made of a lot of little bitty grains. We zoom in even farther, focus, you can see that these little dots on this black and white photo, let's get the focus right, those are actual grains of silver. Isn't that insane? A black and white photograph is made from a bunch of little specks of silver metal, and you can see it right there. Like, in fact, if we zoom back out slowly, you can see that these things take shape, and you can start to see his face again. This is so crazy to me. So like, a photo is literally made up of grains of silver. That's where the term grain comes from for a photo, like literally little grains that make up the picture. The more sensitive the film, the larger those grains will be. So like an ISO 800 film will have larger grains than an ISO 100 film. So now we know how black and white film photography works, but the color process, particularly the C41 color process, is a little different. There are multiple layers to the film and special chemicals called dye couplers which are activated with the silver. The silver is then washed away by the bleach and fix process, and you're left with only the dyes, giving you a color negative photograph. A lot of photographers develop their film in a little tank like this. They just put the chemicals in for the right amount of time and temperature and all kinds of stuff. But I'm going to be honest with you, I was a little bit intimidated by this process, and I didn't want to mess it up. I wanted to find a professional lab that uses a method called the Induct method that handles like multiple film rolls at once. And I was super excited to find out that one of the most well-respected labs in the industry is right here in Alabama. They're known as Indy Film Lab. You send them the film, they will develop the film using a really cool old machine that they kept running from the 90s, right? They will then scan and digitize that film with an old scanner that they paired up with new file saving technologies so that you can have a digital copy of your film photo and share it whoever and however you want. Anyway, it's amazing. Indy is a cool small business, and photographers from all over the world send their film here, and I'm excited today to share with you the film development process. So
Ok, en aras de mantener el video corto, voy a compartir todos estos enlaces para que vean cada uno de los videos. Se los recomiendo todos. Cada cosita, entre más profundizan, se va haciendo mucho más interesante y pueda que termine cada uno comprando una cámara digital que aún utilice una película en vez de la típica memoria. Entonces, ahora les comparto el documental principal. Voy a tratar de mantener la presentación en menos de una hora. Demora 34 minutos, pero como les comentaba, en cualquier momento pueden detener el video y ver el link más tarde.
The invention of photography was not one discovery that led to what we understand as photography today.
There are winners and losers in the evolution of photography.
It's so fascinating at every different point in its history. The way that we familiarize ourselves with the world around us just fundamentally changed with photography.
Camera obscura means dark room. That's all it is. It's a room with no light in it. And if you have a room with no light and you poke a little hole in the side of that room and you let light in from the outside, by miracle, you'll have an image projected upside down, turned around, but in color and moving on the other side of the wall.
It's a phenomenon that people have been aware of for thousands and thousands of years. It's easy to do. It's very often the first project that is taught in photography classes, just as a way to get people to understand the simplicity of what the camera is.
Later improvements of the camera obscura included putting a lens in the hole so that the light could be focused, so that you would have a brighter and more focused image that would be projected on the wall.
But for photography, the camera is essentially a box. The early experimenters with photography all knew that they wanted to make images in that box.
The story of the invention of photography builds on experiments after experiment.
Johann Heinrich Schulze is a German professor. And in the case of Schulze's experiment, what you have is a glass jar, and it's filled with chalk. There's some nitric acid, and there's some silver. It's sparingly sensitive to light, so you have this jar with a barrier around the outside, and when light goes through the stencil, it then darkens the chalk that is facing the glass on the inside of the jar. And this is where Schulze contributes to the evolution of photography, is that he's proving that this is done by light and not by heat.
I think it's impossible for us today to imagine what a revelation the first photographs would have been to people. These mirrors with a memory to record things that looked just like what we saw. People's ideas of time changed completely. For the first time, you would know what your grandparents looked like, even if they died before you were born. To see this process make its place in the lives of ordinary people is, to me, the most exciting thing about it. It changed everything.
In 1814, 1815, you have a man named Nicéphore Niepce. And what he discovered was that asphalt was sensitive to light. He painted the solution on a piece of glass and put an engraving on a piece of paper on top of that, and where the light shined through and exposed that asphalt, it hardened. If you put that piece of glass with the asphalt into a solvent, it will remove the areas that weren't hardened. The earliest photograph we know is on a piece of pewter made by Nicéphore Niepce. It's a view from a window. It's from the 1820s, and this image made by asphalt still exists. So that's the invention of photography. Niepce knows that he's onto something, and he takes Louis Daguerre on as a partner.
Daguerre was well known in Paris in the 1820s, well before the 1839 announcement of the daguerreotype. He was a showman. He ran this 75-foot diorama.
Daguerre himself wants to make images. He understands how a camera obscura works. Niepce didn't have the money. He didn't have the youth. He didn't have the health. He really kick-started Daguerre. When Niepce died, Daguerre continued his experiments on his own. By 1839, Daguerre has a system that is fully realized. It's perfect. It's a piece of copper coated with silver, and you have to polish it very well, to the point where you have a polish that when you turn the plate towards a darkened room, it looks black. And it's fumed with iodine, and when you take it out of the box, it's yellow. That's silver iodide. Plate is then put into a camera obscura, or we would say camera now, but a camera obscura. Given enough time, it's exposed. When you take it out of the camera in a darkened room, there's nothing to see on the plate. Completely invisible, same yellow coating. But when you put it in another box with a little container of mercury and heat the mercury, the fumes of the mercury dance upon the plate, and when you withdraw that from the box, you have an image. You still have to fix the image, and fixing is a strange term. It basically means that you're preventing the plate from changing any more as light strikes the plate. And you place it into a solution that fixes it. It's something that we now all call hypo. Daguerreotype is placed into a special case. It's designed to keep air away from the plate, because air is what makes silver tarnish. Daguerre would give the process to the government. The government then would allow anyone in the world to do the daguerreotype, except England. And so if you wanted to make daguerreotypes in England, you had to pay a fee.
This is the Giroux daguerreotype camera. It would be the world's first commercially manufactured Linsol cameras. It's the camera, but it's also the system that goes with it that you need to process, sensitize and process the image.
It was essentially an American phenomenon. It was the Americans that embraced it, that used it. It was Americans that were leaving home and striking out further and further west so that people could have something to think about and to reflect on and to remember people by.
Daguerre is in France making images with silver iodide on metal plates, and Talbot is working in England making images with silver chloride on paper. Working simultaneously in two different countries, not quite knowing about the other. But that changes when you start to have articles in the press. Now it's public. And so a rivalry begins. William Henry Fox Talbot is a gentleman scholar in England living in an old abbey in the village of Laycock.
He was a member of the House of Lords. He was a wealthy individual who had many, many interests.
Talbot is on his honeymoon in Lake Como in Italy, and he's trying to make drawings with a camera lucida. He's trying to do pencil sketches and realize that he has no skill whatsoever in drawing. He wants to make pictures within a camera obscura. All he has to do is find the material that he can put into the back of the camera to record the image.
Finally, when he returns home to Laycock Abbey, he starts doing experiments, and he is able to produce a photographic image.
Talbot is making images by using silver chloride in the production of making what he called photogenic drawings, which are essentially just coating paper with salt, coating paper with silver nitrate, and place a fern or objects on top of the paper. Put a piece of glass on top of that and lay it in the sunlight. It will darken. Up to that point, it's not so much different than what Wedgwood did. But Niepce and Wedgwood could not figure out a way to keep the drawings. What Talbot discovers is that if he takes that image and puts it into a stronger solution of salt water, all the areas that were not exposed to light, all the areas that didn't turn to metallic silver become less sensitive. They are not removed completely, but he can show them to people in the house. You can see them by candlelight. This is the type of camera that Talbot used in his earliest experiments with photogenic drawing. Many of them are still around, and you can see them as long as you don't bring them out into too much light.
Usually when you see them, they're sort of under a piece of velvet. So it feels like this intimate experience of looking at a photograph in its first days. Now photography is so ubiquitous that we probably don't think about how special and magical that experience was.
Talbot improves the photogenic drawing process by switching from silver chloride to silver iodide, the same silver halide that Daguerre uses in his process. The latent image calotype process that he invents in 1840 allows him to make a little bit of an exposure. And then he develops out the invisible image to a visible image using gallic acid. And so now he can put this into a camera and actually do pictures of living human beings. He can then make photographic negatives, and after those negatives are fixed with hypo, he can then place those on top of a second sheet of sensitive paper, expose that to light, and now he makes a positive proof. So he has negative and positive. He essentially introduces the negative-positive potential for photography that becomes the standard of photography until the invention of digital photography. The rivalry between Daguerre and Talbot continues today. There are champions of Talbot and the champions of Daguerre. Both camps feel that their man invented photography. In fact, it's all photography, just a different type.
Up until photography, only the very wealthy who could afford to have portraits painted had any notion of what their ancestors looked like. Photography was used primarily for portraits because people is what we are primarily interested in. We see it as a very popular way to do what we've always wanted to do, which is to record the features of people we love.
I'm going to show you a collodion negative on glass. And I'm just going to take it out of here very carefully. This process was invented in 1851 by Frederick Scott Archer.
In the 1850s, you had the daguerreotype, you had the calotype paper negative. The daguerreotype was a commercial success. The plate that they hand the customer is the same plate that was in the camera. There's no negative.
What you got with the calotype was a negative, and it was a negative that could be reproduced very easily. You could print dozens, even hundreds of positive prints from that negative, but it made a very soft photograph.
It was much less sensitive than the daguerreotype. You couldn't do portraits easily with that process.
The desire was to have the reproducibility of a positive-negative process with the precision and detail of the daguerreotype.
But in 1851, Frederick Scott Archer invented a process called the wet collodion process. The wet plate process can give you a negative to make paper prints. It can give you a direct positive plate called an ambrotype, and another direct positive plate called a tintype. When you do the wet plate process, you make a glass negative, and that glass negative can then be contact printed onto various printing processes and make thousands and thousands of prints. By the time you get to the late 1850s, really replaces the daguerreotype.
The positive-negative process won out, in part because it was more economically viable.
It does require some advanced planning when you're taking it on the road. You have to have a portable darkroom. You pour the collodion on the plate, you dip it in the silver bath, and while it's dripping wet with silver nitrate, you take the picture, come back, and develop it, and you have to do all of that before the plate dries. And so the people that made landscape images, they had to carry a wagon with all of their chemicals. It was a challenge.
Photography shaped the way we remember things. It's a really important cultural change, no longer through ballads and poems and stories, but through looking at a likeness is the way we remember what happened and who was. This is when we see the rise of the great industrial photographic houses producing popular photographs of tourist sites. Even then, we're beginning to think if you don't have a photograph of it, you didn't really experience it. It was the beginning of really aggressive mass marketing and mass production of photographs for general consumption.
And this was the predominant printing paper from 1850 to about 1890.
We begin to see how, really as early as the 1870s and 80s, the photograph becomes a really important, not just conveyor of knowledge and information, but a shaper of knowledge and information. And it's the albumin print that made that possible because it was precise, it was detailed, it was cheap, and it could be mass-produced and distributed easily.
One of the major themes in photography is this desire to have a more permanent image. You have the Woodbury type, you have the platinum print, very stable, very long-lasting processes. And then you also have the pigment family of processes, the gum bichromate process and the carbon print process.
Pictorialists really established photography as a fine art form. So they used things like the gum bichromate process or platinum prints that involved a lot of handwork and craftsmanship. So you really had a sense of the photographic object as something that was made by somebody. Alfred Stieglitz is the person who is most associated with what was called the photosecession. He and Edward Steichen actually co-founded the movement, and they promoted this idea through a publication called Camera Work. Stieglitz had a gallery called 291 in New York that showed photography as an art form.
This is a camera that was used by Alfred Stieglitz. It was given to the museum by George O'Keeffe in the 1950s. The opening of that lens determines the sharpness of the picture. If you open it up quite a ways, you get an image that's kind of soft on the edges, and he was interested in what we call pictorialist photography, and this was a lens that was designed to do that.
Stieglitz and Steichen and Casimir wanted people to take photography seriously as an art form. It's not just an automatic activity that produced images without anybody's intervention. I think what the argument was really about was, where is the creative input of the artist in photography? And that's a theme that goes back to the invention of the medium. With gelatin silver materials, you start to get manufactured photographic paper, manufactured film. Once it became sort of cheap and ubiquitous, it changed the relationship to photography fundamentally. Everybody not only had been the subject of a photograph, but had made photographs themselves.
In the middle of the 19th century, nearly all processes that involved the use of silver nitrate were made in a two-step process. Having a one-step process would be infinitely easier. And so, unlike, say, the wet collodion process, where you pour collodion onto a plate and it has a bromide, and then you take that plate and dip it into silver nitrate, emulsion photography puts the bromide and the silver into the same solution. It was a combination of experiments done by several different people, but for the most part, it's an English invention. Gelatin emulsions are made by taking gelatin, like the Jell-O that you buy in the store today, and putting the gelatin into a container of water. The gelatin is allowed to swell. The swollen gelatin is melted. You then pour in the bromide, pour in the silver nitrate, and stir the solution. And so now you have silver bromide in hot gelatin. This is an emulsion. Now, in the early 1880s, most of the gelatin dry plates, the glass plates, were coated by pouring the hot gelatin onto a hot glass plate, very much in the way that a collodion plate would be coated by hand. Once you have a dry plate, now you don't have to take a darkroom into the field. You don't have to develop the plate before it dries. You can take a package of plates and you can go on a trip, expose the plates, and then weeks later come back to the comfort of your own darkroom and develop the plate. And that's an important discovery. The same emulsion was applied to paper.
These are examples of gelatin silver prints. The gelatin silver print was first introduced in the late 1800s. Gelatin silver print is a developing out process rather than a printing out process.
Printing out is when light strikes an object and you actually see it visibly change. Developing out, on the other hand, is a latent image. And what that means is that you just need a little bit of light exposing this material, but you don't see a visible change until you put that material into another chemical, which brings out the invisible image.
You would start with a much smaller negative than with a contact printing method.
So at the beginning of photography, a negative has to be the same size as the print you want to make it. And that's because they're contact printed. The negative is actually touching the paper that's becoming the final print. As photography progresses, we become able to enlarge a negative. You can put it in an enlarger and make a bigger print. It's no longer contact printed.
In 1888, George Eastman came out with the Kodak camera. You no longer had to be a professional and know the chemistry. You could actually do it yourself.
It sounds really simple, well, just send it to us. You press the button, we do the rest. And suddenly, it invents an entire new industry. This is the oldest known Kodak camera. It's called the Kodak. It's serial number 6, meaning it was the 6th one made. After all 100 exposures have been made, the camera will be shipped back to Rochester for processing and reloading. Shutter release is on the side. Still works. Not bad for a camera made in 1888.
Because the camera was smaller and easy to carry now, people took their cameras everywhere. It opened up a field of photography for the general public, for anyone to capture all the different moments of their life.
Basic aesthetic of a gelatin silver print is a smooth surface because the gelatin sits on top of the paper and the gelatin is what holds the image material in it, as opposed to, say, the salted paper print where the image material was sinking into the fibers of the paper.
The gelatin silver process was the dominant photographic process of the 20th century. The vast majority of the analog photographs that we are familiar with were made with this process. The clarity and sharpness of the black and white gelatin silver print became the norm for photojournalism. It was the standard way that information from far away was produced and sent to be published in newspapers and magazines. The process became forever linked with the documentary style of photography that was established by photographers like Lewis Hine and FSA photographers such as Dorothea Lange and Walker Evans.
Silver gelatin allows you to make black and white images. It is responsible for all the movies you've ever seen. That's all silver gelatin.
When George Eastman came out with the Kodak, they started making flexible transparent film about 1889. Once you have a flexible medium, motion pictures becomes possible.
Gelatin silver is also responsible for color photography. During development, the silver releases dyes, and during fixing, you get rid of the silver, but the dyes remain. But all of the color photographs you've ever made, everything in the 20th century that was color, had silver and had gelatin in that emulsion. And that's really what's becoming obsolete by the digital process.
The shift from analog to digital photography has been going on a long time.
2004 was the high watermark year for film production. After 2004, you really start to see the sales of digital cameras taking over film cameras.
I teach public workshops in photographic processes here at George Eastman House. And we've just recently declared that silver gelatin emulsion is a historic process. So now we're teaching people how to make dry plates and their own photographic paper from scratch.
When color photography comes out, people think of it as being very artificial at first. Serious, sincere, sort of authentic images were in black and white. After World War II, film for making color prints became available. People's associations with photography began to transform into color.
All silver-based photographic processes started out as blue sensitive. Blue and white photographed as the same value. So when you look at 19th century landscape photographs and you wonder, why didn't they have any clouds in those days? It's because the white of the sky and the blue of the sky photograph as the same value. In order to have color film, you must have black and white film that will record all colors. The sensitizing of emulsions was done by actually adding dyes to the liquid emulsion. So it's called dye sensitizing. Frederick Ives was instrumental in understanding that black and white film had to be dye sensitized in order to get a record from which you could make color images. It's really complicated. Chromogenic color photography was invented in the 1930s, and the process that really ushered in this entire movement of color was the Kodachrome process. It really begins with the work of Mans and Godowski at the Kodak Research Labs. Chromogenic color prints are made with a gelatin emulsion that's based on silver, and there are many layers. When the film or the paper is being developed, each layer releases the dye that it needs on the cyan, the yellow, or magenta layer. During the processing, the silver is actually removed, leaving only the color behind. And so you end up with a full color picture that was made with light going into the paper or onto the film simultaneously. It is rocket science. And so the chromogenic color process becomes the predominant process used throughout the 20th century, and it's still being used today. But those wheels are starting to slow down. Once chromogenic color is gone, we will never, ever see it happen again, because it requires an incredible infrastructure. Once it's gone, it's gone.
The technology has been shifting constantly since 1839, and we can only expect that it will continue to shift. Everyone's a photographer now. Everyone carries a camera in their purse or pocket. We make photographs in a different way from the way we used to, but we make them for the same reasons. I mean, I would argue that a 19th century Victorian family album has exactly the same purpose as the 200 pictures of your kid that you carry on your phone.
I was working in the Apparatus Division Research Laboratories. My supervisor came to me one day and said, look at a new type of imager that had just become available called charge-coupled device imager. And that was the Fairchild device. It was called the CCD201. I thought if I could build some sort of device that would capture an image, well, that's called a camera. I called it my baby because it made me cry a lot. I always say that. What I was dealing with was something that could convert a light pattern to a charge pattern, but I had to get that charge pattern off of the device really quickly and store it somewhere. So I was going to try to make a digital conversion device and then store it in RAM. And so I said I needed a form of permanent storage that didn't require battery. That was easy, actually, because magnetic tape on cassettes were being used for all kinds of reasons. At the early days of computers, they were storing digital information. People always talk about building the camera. Well, half this effort, probably more than half the effort, was building the playback unit, make it suitable for a television signal, because that was the only way to electronically look at an image. And this was all digital. Right from the output of that CCD, all the way through to right to the output to the TV set. That was digital, everywhere in between.
I'll give you kind of a timeline of digital photography. We got Steve Sasson in 1975 building the first truly digital camera. In 1986, Eastman Kodak Company comes out with the megapixel sensor. 1987-88, Jim McGarvey builds tactical camera, which evolves into the 1991 Kodak DCS. Came in a rather hefty suitcase that contained the camera and the storage device. The next year, they were able to actually combine all of those parts into one smaller body, the DCS 200. In 1994, the Apple QuickTake 100 is the consumer camera. The first megapixel consumer camera is the Kodak DC-210, 1999. It's a very short timeline here when you get into it, maybe 20 years or so. And of course, now everybody has either a smartphone or a tablet with a camera built in.
First digital camera I ever saw, you had to load a floppy disk in, and my mind was blown when I saw that. I was like, how does, what is this? You could put, a picture on a computer now? There's generations of kids now that are alive that'll never know, what film is like and what, leafing through a shoebox full of, 4x6s from Motophoto, things like that. It's just that's gone.
That's Talbot. That's the man who invented the negative. Digital made the negative obsolete, and this is the way we see images. It can be deleted by accident. It's not a physical thing.
We used to have the possibility that you might run across a photograph of your grandmother when she was 18 years old in the back of a drawer that nobody remembered or knew about, and suddenly you've got this picture that can be found later and interpreted. And when you have a digital image, what is the thing that you have? You have code or something. Rarely do people print out their photographs anymore. When we're seeing things sort of ephemerally on a screen, it becomes very much like everything else we see on a screen. Our relationship to memory with regard to the photographic image is changing, and it'll be really interesting to see where that goes.
It's surprising to most people when I tell them I love digital. I mean, I just love the technology of digital, and they'll look at me and think it's heresy. But artists have come to a point where many of them are saying, I feel like the machine is in control and I want to have my hands in this object. When the finished product is something other than a computer screen, it harkens back to the day when photography was a craft. It's not just about the image, although the image is king. It's about the object itself, and you made that object.
Ok, para mí era importante y necesario que tuvieran esto un poquito largo, pero como contraste, solo para poder apreciar el trabajo, las limitaciones y los desafíos con los que se tropezaron los primeros astrónomos que decidieron registrar su trabajo. En la próxima imagen les voy a compartir uno de los más famosos, pero en el observatorio, cuando estemos en plena sesión para la segunda parte de esta lección, vamos a hablar de detalles específicos. Por ahora los voy a dejar solo con una galería cortica del trabajo del señor Barnard. Permítanme un segundo. Ok, en estas imágenes que estamos viendo en este momento, aunque no se ve, no se nota una definición, solo traten de imaginarse lo difícil que fue para el señor Barnard lograr esta clase de imágenes. Con un telescopio de 40 pulgadas en el observatorio de Yerkes. Eso queda en Wisconsin, si no estoy mal. Entonces, el señor Edward Emerson Barnard trabajó muchísimo en las primeras astrofotografías. Si quieren, más adelante o en la descripción en el chat les puedo compartir esta dirección donde está todo el trabajo del señor, pero resulta que él no es quien lo publica, sino su sobrina, que es la señora que estamos viendo ahí a la derecha, la señora Mary Calvert. Es gracias a ella que conocemos el trabajo del señor. Fue tan estético, tan técnico y tan dedicado el señor Barnard que hay una estrella nombrada con su apellido que queda en el sistema de Alpha Centauri y se conoce como la estrella de Barnard. En otra oportunidad detallaremos todo esto, pero por ahora los voy a dejar con estos links que están en la descripción. Por favor, véanlos cada uno, comenten en la página que tiene habilitados los comentarios y los espero en nuestra próxima sesión en el observatorio.